Portland in October is a city that breathes autumn. The humid air is thick with the scent of fallen leaves, the tart aroma of coffee brewed in tiny coffee shops on every corner, and the faint smoke of wood-burning fireplaces smoldering in old brick buildings. A chill, slightly sharp, clings to the skin, creeps under the collar of a coat, making you shiver. I stand on the sidewalk, looking up at the mirror-smooth facade of a trendy loft in the Pearl District, where the glass panels reflect the dim light of the street lamps and the occasional flash of neon from the windows of neighboring galleries. Silhouettes of people flicker in the windows of the upper floors, confident, stylish, with drinks in hand. Inside, the annual cocktail party of the advertising agency Brightwave, where my wife, Laura, works, is in full swing. I, Jacob Wilson, 34, an engineer at a tech firm that makes software for smart homes, stand at the entrance, adjusting my tie, which feels like a noose. 7 years of marriage, and I still feel out of place at these events. The people inside talk too loudly, laugh too cleverly, exchange glances that are full of hidden innuendo. My boots squeak on the wet pavement. It has recently rained, and the puddles on the sidewalk reflect the blinking Brightwave sign in a trendy swirl. From the open doors comes a murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, and the soft jazz that creates an atmosphere of sophisticated casualness. Laura picked out a shirt for me, a navy one with thin stripes that she says make me more modern. She's always had a knack for dressing, transforming me from a tired-eyed, run-of-the-mill guy into someone who looks like he knows what he's doing. Laura herself is wearing a burgundy dress that clings to her like a second skin. When she was putting it on at home, twirling in front of the mirror, I told her she looked stunning. She smiled, but it was distant, as if my words were just background noise. Now, looking at her through the glass walls of the loft, I'm beginning to think she didn't pick that dress for me. I step inside and am immediately enveloped by the warm hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with the aroma of salmon canapés. The loft is spacious, with high ceilings and huge windows through which the Willamette River reflects the city lights like a scattering of stars. Abstract paintings adorn the walls, and along one of them runs a bar with a wooden counter, behind which a bartender in a black vest deftly mixes cocktails. I make my way in, nodding to strangers who smile at me with polite emptiness in their eyes. "Whiskey neat," I tell the bartender, a skinny guy with an anchor tattooed on his wrist. He nods, pours the amber liquid into a square glass, and sets it down in front of me with a soft thump. "Hard day?" he asks, wiping his hands with a towel. "Hard life," I mutter, and he grins as if I've said something witty. I pick up my glass and move to the edge of the counter to survey the room. Laura is standing in the center of the room, surrounded by a crowd of colleagues. Her blonde hair, usually pulled back into a neat bun, is down today, cascading over her shoulders. She's always been beautiful, not the flashy, ad model kind of beauty, but something warm and inviting, with the faintest freckles on her nose and the kind of green eyes that could make you feel like the only person in the room. But right now her eyes are not on me, but on Owen Clark, her new creative director. Owen is tall and trim, with dark hair slicked back and a light stubble that looks like he spent half an hour in front of the mirror grooming it. He's wearing a dark gray suit, no tie, and the top button of his shirt undone, giving him the look of a man who knows how to break the rules, but still manages to be the center of attention. He says something to Laura, leaning in a little too close, and she laughs, a loud laugh with a slight tilt of her head back, like he's just told the best joke in the world. I haven't heard that laugh in months. It used to be mine, back when we'd curl up on the couch, watching old sitcoms and eating pizza straight from the box. I take a sip of whiskey, feeling it burn down my throat, and try to tell myself it's nothing. Laura's a marketer. Her job is to be charming, to make people like her. Owen is her boss, and she's just trying to impress. But when her hand touches his sleeve, a light, almost weightless movement, something inside me clenches. It's not the kind of casual gesture you throw to a colleague. It's personal, intimate, like there's a secret between them that I don't know about. "Are you alone?" A voice next to me breaks my thoughts. I turn around and see a woman in her 30s with short brown hair and serious brown eyes. She's wearing a black midi dress, simple but elegant, and a thin silver bracelet on her wrist. She's holding a glass of white wine and looking at me with a slight smile that has something sympathetic about it. Jacob, I introduce myself, holding out my hand. Laura's husband. Anna, she says, shaking my hand. Her palm is warm, but her grip is firm, like someone who's used to being in control. I'm from the design department. Laura mentioned you a couple of times. Just a couple, I joke, but my voice sounds strained. Anna smiles, but her gaze slides to Laura and Owen, who are now standing even closer, their shoulders almost touching. They look great together, don't they? She says, her tone light as if she were commenting on the weather, but the words hit me like a slap. Laura and Owen, I mean, they're just so on the same page. Always staying up late, planning campaigns, brainstorming ideas. They have chemistry. Chemistry, I repeat, and the word seems bitter to me, like cheap coffee. Is that what you call it? Anna blinks, as if she's just now realizing she's said something wrong. She takes a quick sip of wine, her cheeks turning slightly pink. Oh, I didn't mean that, she waves her hand, trying to smooth over the awkwardness. It's just, they're a good team. Owen, he's so charismatic. Everyone in the office is crazy about him. But Laura, she's great. She keeps him on his toes. I nod, but her words settle in my chest like wet sand. Charismatic. Crazy. I look at Laura again. She's so close to Owen now that their shadows blend under the lights strung across the room. He leans in, whispers something in her ear, and she laughs again, touching his arm. The gesture isn't casual or professional. It's like they're sharing something that belongs only to the two of them. Jacob, you need to meet Caitlin from the media. Laura is suddenly at my side, her voice too loud, too cheerful. She grabs my elbow, but her touch feels formal, like she's fulfilling a duty. Her green eyes are glittering, but not at me, they're darting around the room, as if searching for someone. Come on, I'll introduce you. I'm fine here, I say, raising my glass of whiskey. You go and have fun. She frowns, but only for a second, and then her face lights up again with the smile she uses for clients. Don't be a bore, Jake. She tugs at my hand, but I don't move. Her smile fades. Okay, whatever. I'll be right back. She leaves, and I watch her walk back to Owen, her steps light, almost dancing. I feel out of place, like an old couch that's been abandoned because it no longer fits in. The bartender catches my eye and silently pours another whiskey. I nod my thanks, but I don't drink. Instead, I watch. Laura has always been the life of the party, able to connect with everyone from the waiter to the CEO. When we first started dating, I loved watching her light up a room with her energy, the way her smile made people feel special. But that energy isn't directed at me anymore. She's standing next to Owen, her hand brushing his sleeve again, and he leans in, their faces so close I can almost see their breath mingling. You okay, buddy? The bartender's voice pulls me out of my thoughts again. His eyebrows are raised. There's a slight worry in his eyes. Yeah, I lied, taking a sip of whiskey. Just enjoying the evening. He nods, but his eyes say he doesn't believe me. I turn away, not wanting to continue the conversation. My gaze finds Laura again. She's laughing so loudly now that her voice drowns out the music, a jazz standard playing somewhere in the corner. Owen leans even closer, his hand brushing her waist, and she doesn't pull away. It's not a professional gesture. It's not a command. It's something that makes my stomach clench, like someone turned off the lights in the room. They're always like this, someone nearby says, and I turn around. It's a man of about 40 in a dark green jacket with a slight gray at the temples. He's holding a glass of something clear, either gin or vodka. I'm Ted, by the way, from sales. Jacob, I answered, reluctantly shaking his hand. Laura's husband. Oh, you're the mystery husband, Ted smirks, but there's no warmth in his eyes. I've heard about you. Laura says you're always busy with your projects. She says so? I try to smile, but it comes out crooked. Yeah, Ted takes a sip. But, she's great. She keeps up appearances. And Owen, he's a master of his craft. He and Laura are like the Bonnie and Clyde of marketing. I feel the blood pounding in my temples. Bonnie and Clyde. The comparison seems too accurate, too painful. Do they spend a lot of time together? I ask, trying to keep my voice even. Ted shrugs, but his gaze becomes more cautious, as if he realizes he's gone too far. Well, that's the job. Campaigns, deadlines, all that stuff. They often sit in the office for long periods. But it's nothing special, just business. Just business, I repeat, and the words sound hollow, like an echo in an empty room. Ted clears his throat, mumbles something about needing to say hello to someone, and disappears into the crowd. I am left alone, clutching my glass so tightly my fingers are starting to ache. Laura is standing by the window now, Owen at his side, his arm still around her waist. They look out at the river, and the light from the street lamps reflects in her eyes, making her look like someone from an old movie, beautiful, unapproachable, alien. I finish my whiskey and set the glass down on the bar with a soft thud. The bartender looks at me, but I shake my head enough. I don't want to get drunk. I don't want to lose control. But I also don't want to stay here, where every time Laura looks at Owen, it feels like a blow. I make my way to the exit, past the crowd, who are already starting to dance to a new track, something with a guitar riff, too cheerful for my mood. It's cold outside, and I stuff my hands in my coat pockets, looking out at the river. The lights of the city shimmer on the water, as if someone had scattered shards of glass. I think about how Laura and I walked along this embankment 2 years ago, holding hands, laughing as she spilled coffee on her jacket. It all seemed simple then. Now I stand here, alone, and feel something inside me crumble, slowly but surely. I don't know how much time passes when Laura finally emerges. Her heels click on the pavement, and I hear her voice before I see her. "Jake, where have you been?" She steps closer, her brows furrowed, but her voice sounds more annoyed than concerned. "I was looking for you." "Really?" I turn around, my voice harsher than I intended. "Because it looked like you were busy." Her eyes narrow, and she crosses her arms over her chest. The burgundy dress shimmers in the streetlight, and for a second I remember how she looked when I first saw her in that dress, like she was made to be the center of attention. "What does this mean?" she asks, her voice growing colder. "Are you starting again?" Again? I feel something hot boiling inside me, but I force myself to breathe evenly. "Laura, I saw the way you looked at Owen, the way you touched him. It didn't look like just a job." She rolls her eyes, and the gesture so familiar, so hers hits me harder than I expected. "Oh my God, Jake, are you serious? This is my job. Owen is my boss. I have to be on good terms with him if I want to move forward. You know how it works." "I know," I say, and I sound tired, almost defeated. "But I also know what it's like to like someone, and it doesn't feel like just a job." Laura opens her mouth to answer, but then closes it, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looks at me, and there's something in her eyes, not guilt, exactly, but something I can't quite place. "I'm tired," she says finally. "Let's go home." I nod because I don't know what else to say. We walk to the car in silence, and the Willamette River continues to reflect the lights as if nothing has changed. But I know that everything has changed. The drive home from downtown Portland was silent, as if Laura and I were in two different cars, separated by an invisible wall. The streetlights of Laurelhurst cast long shadows that slid across the asphalt as our aging Subaru Outback rolled toward home. The fall of 2025 in Portland was damp, with the smell of wet leaves and the smoke from fireplaces hanging in the air like a reminder of something cozy that Laura and I hadn't had in a long time. I, Jacob Wilson, 34, an engineer accustomed to taking complex systems apart and finding where they broke, sat behind the wheel, clutching it as if it might hold my life together. Laura, my wife of 32 years, a marketer at the Brightwave advertising agency, looked out the window, her fingers fiddling with the hem of the burgundy dress I now hated, even though I had helped her button it that morning. Our house, a two-story cottage in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, with wood floors that creak in the hallway and windows we always forget to wash, was once our sanctuary. Laura and I chose it 7 years ago when we were first married because it was cozy but not pretentious, with a small backyard where we dreamed of planting an apple tree. Now, when I turned off the engine, the silence in the car was almost palpable, as if we both knew a conversation was inevitable, but neither wanted to start. Laura opened the door first, her heels clicking on the gravel path to the porch. I followed, feeling the cold air bite into my cheeks. The house was warm inside, smelling of lavender from the diffuser Laura had bought last week, claiming it was stress-relieving. She dropped her purse on the console in the entryway without looking at me and headed toward the kitchen. "Do you want some water?" she asked, her voice even but with a slight note of irritation, as if I had already gotten on her nerves. "No," I said, hanging my coat on the hook. My words came out heavier than I intended, and she noticed. Laura stopped, turned, her green eyes narrowed like a cat that sensed a threat. "What's wrong, Jake?" She crossed her arms, and the burgundy dress stretched over her shoulders, emphasizing her slender figure. Laura had always been beautiful, not model pretty, but something real, with freckles across her nose and blonde hair that she usually wore in a bun but had left loose today. Her beauty had always seemed honest to me, but now it looked like a weapon aimed at someone other than me. I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. All evening, I'd been replaying her laugh, her hand on Owen Clark's wrist, their glances that lingered too long, too close. Owen was her new creative director, tall and dark, and with that infuriating confidence that came with money and power. At the party, he'd been the center of attention, as if the entire loft revolved around him, and Laura was his companion, shining in his light. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to me like wet leaves to the soles of my feet. "Let's talk," I said, leaning against the wall in the hallway. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "About the evening." Laura rolled her eyes, a gesture I knew all too well. She always did it when she thought I was exaggerating. "Oh, for God's sake, Jake, what now?" She walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and pulled out a bottle of water. "You've been sitting there all evening with a sour expression, like I dragged you there by force." "I wasn't sitting there with a sour face," I snapped, feeling something hot boiling inside me. "I watched you hanging off Owen all evening, laughing, touching him, standing so close like you were." I fell silent, unable to finish. The word lovers stuck in my throat like a bone. Laura froze, the bottle of water in her hand shaking. She turned to me, her face a mixture of irritation and something else, guilt, maybe just exhaustion. "Like where what?" Her voice became sharper, almost defiant. "Finish that thought, Jacob. What are you trying to say?" "You know what I mean," I said, stepping closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "It didn't feel like work, Laura. It didn't feel like just coworkers. You touched him like it was something more." She laughed, short and sharp, as if I had said something absurd. It was the same laugh as at the party, but now it cut me like a knife. "Are you serious?" She set the bottle down on the table with such a thud that I flinched. "It's just a job, Jake. You know how important this is to me. Owen is my boss. I have to be on good terms with him if I want to move forward. Do you really think I was flirting there?" "I don't know what to think," I said, my voice shaking, betraying my uncertainty. "But I saw the way you looked at him, the way he looked at you. It didn't seem like just a job." Laura shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're always like this," she said, her voice quieter but with a steely edge. "Always looking for a catch. I'm trying to build a career, Jake. I can't just be your wife forever, sitting at home and waiting for you to get home from work." "I never asked you to be just a wife," I snapped, feeling her words hit a nerve. "But I thought we were a team. And today, you didn't even look my way. You were too busy with Owen." "Because he's my boss," she nearly shouted, her cheeks flushed with anger. "And he decides whether I get a promotion or stay where I am. Do you want me to sit in the corner like you, drinking whiskey while everyone else does their job?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck. She was right about one thing: I didn't like these parties. I didn't like pretending to be interested in her colleagues and their conversations about trends and brands. But that didn't justify what I saw. Or was I really imagining it all? "I just want you to be honest with me," I said finally, my voice quieter, almost pleading. "If something's going on, just tell me." Laura looked at me, and something flickered in her eyes, not guilt, not remorse, but something I couldn't quite place. She turned away, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her dress. "Nothing's happening," she said, and her voice was so even I almost believed it. "I'm tired, Jake. Let's not make a big deal out of nothing." She turned and walked into the bedroom, her heels clicking on the wood floor before the door closed quietly. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the bottle of water she hadn't opened. The silence in the house was deafening, as if the walls had absorbed our argument and were holding it in. I walked into the living room, collapsed on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I kept replaying her laugh in my head, her hand on Owen's wrist, his gaze that was too warm, too personal. I tried to tell myself it meant nothing, but the doubt was like a crack in the glass, small but ready to grow. Morning came too quickly. Light filtered through the curtains, painting the room in gray and gold tones. I woke up on the couch, my neck stiff, my head buzzing from lack of sleep and last night's whiskey. Laura was already up. I could hear her rattling dishes in the kitchen. I stood up, rubbing my eyes, and went to her. She stood by the coffee machine, already dressed for work: black pants, a white blouse, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. Without yesterday's dress, she looked more familiar, but still distant, as if a wall had grown between us. Her purse lay on the table, the same one she had carelessly thrown her phone and keys into yesterday. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Morning," she answered, not looking at me. She poured coffee into a thermos, her movements quick, almost mechanical. "I'm late. We have a presentation today." "Laura," I began, but she raised her hand, stopping me. "Don't start, Jake." Her voice was tired but firm. "I don't want to go over this again. It was a long day yesterday, and I just want today to go well." "Okay," I said, although inside I was seething. "Good luck with the presentation." She nodded, grabbed her purse, and walked out, slamming the door a little too hard. I was left alone in a silence that now seemed hostile to me. I walked over to the table where her purse lay, forgotten in her rush. It wasn't the first time. Laura often left things behind when she was in a hurry. I was about to take the bag to the door for her to pick up later, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the nagging feeling from yesterday, or just instinct, but I opened the bag. Inside was everything I expected: a wallet, lipstick, a couple of pens. And then I saw it: a business card for the Sentinel, a small boutique hotel in downtown Portland. On the back, in Laura's neat handwriting, was a room number: 412. My stomach dropped, as if someone had punched me in the gut. I turned the card over, trying to rationalize: was it for work, a client meeting? But why her handwriting? Why a room number? I put the card down on the table, my hands shaking. I knew I was doing something I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop myself. Laura always left her phone at home when she was in a hurry, and it sat face down on the table. "We never hid our passwords from each other. It was part of our trust," she said. I picked up the phone, entered her code, our wedding date, and opened the conversation with Owen. The messages were short, but each word was a knife. "Can't wait for Friday," Owen wrote. "You know how to cheer me up," Laura replied. Nothing explicit, nothing I could take to court, but the tone was too warm, too intimate. I scrolled higher, hoping to find something that would disprove my suspicions, but all I found was more innuendo. "You were right about that idea. It worked." I felt the blood pounding in my temples, a lump forming in my throat. I put the phone back down, careful not to drop it. The card lay on the table like an indictment. I could have called Laura, demanded an explanation, and stormed into her office screaming. But something in me, maybe fear of the truth, maybe some vestige of pride, told me to stop. I didn't want to be the guy who made a scene. I wanted to know for sure. I wanted the truth, whatever it was. I sat down on the couch, holding the card in my hands, and stared at it as if it might speak. Laura would be back for her bag in an hour, maybe two. I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait. I had to find out what was going on. Not for the sake of an argument, not for revenge, but for myself. Because if I was right, if Laura was lying to me, then everything I thought I had was built on sand. And that thought scared me more than anything else. It was a damp, cold Friday night in Portland, as if the city had decided I wasn't already carrying enough weight. It was drizzling, coating the sidewalks with a thin film of water that reflected the neon signs and streetlights, turning the downtown area into a blur. I, Jacob Wilson, 34, an engineer accustomed to taking apart complex systems and finding where they break, sat in my car, parked 2 blocks from the offices of Brightwave, the advertising agency where my wife, Laura, worked. My hands gripped the steering wheel, even though the engine had been off for about 10 minutes. I was waiting for her, waiting to see where she would go, who she would go with, and, most important, whether she would confirm my worst fears. It all started with a business card I found in her bag on Monday morning, a white card for the Sentinel Hotel with the room number 412 written in her neat handwriting. Then there were the messages on her phone, which I checked while she was running to get her bag. "Can't wait for Friday," Owen Clark, her creative director, had written. "You know how to cheer me up," Laura had replied. It wasn't explicit, but the words were like a knife in my chest. Since then, I haven't slept properly, I haven't eaten, I haven't been able to focus on work. Every day I pretend everything is fine. I smile at Laura when she comes home, but inside I feel like our marriage is a house built on sand, and it's about to collapse. Today she said she'd be late at work. Another presentation. "Jake, you know." I nodded, as always, but I already had a plan in my head. I didn't want to be the guy who followed his wife around like some kind of detective in a cheesy sitcom, but the card and the texts were nagging at me. I had to know, not to make a scene, but for myself, to stop wondering if I was right or just going crazy. I looked at my watch, 6:47 p.m. Laura usually left the office around 7, unless she stayed late. I pulled on a dark baseball cap I'd found in the glove compartment and pulled the hood of my sweatshirt up under my jacket, hoping it would make me less noticeable. My Subaru Outback, old but reliable, was parked in the shade across from the coffee shop, where I could see the entrance to Brightwave, a glass building with a bright sign that blinked even in the rain. At 7:03 p.m., I saw her. Laura was walking out of the office, her blonde hair pulled up into a high bun, slightly disheveled, as if she'd been running around all day. She was wearing a black pencil skirt, a white blouse, and the long gray coat I'd given her last New Year's. She looked flawless, as always. Her green eyes caught the light of the streetlights, even from a distance, and the freckles on her nose made her look like the girl I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. But today, she didn't look like my Laura. She looked like someone who belonged to another life. Owen Clark was walking next to her. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain, but he still looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. He was wearing a navy blue blazer, jeans, and a white shirt unbuttoned to the top button, as if to tell the world, "I'm too cool for a tie." They walked close, their shoulders almost touching, and Laura was laughing at something he said, her hand lightly brushing his elbow. The gesture, the same one she'd made at the party last Friday, was like a punch to the gut. I felt the blood pounding in my temples, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. They headed toward Owen's black sedan, parked across the street. I started the car, trying to be inconspicuous, and followed them at a distance. The rain was getting heavier, the windshield wipers were squealing, and I tried to convince myself that this was a mistake, that Laura was just going to a business meeting with a colleague. But as they turned toward the downtown Sentinel Hotel, my heart began to pound as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. I parked on a side street a half-block away and pulled my hood up. The Sentinel was a small boutique hotel with a dark brick exterior and gold lettering over the entrance. Inside, warm light streamed through tall windows, and a doorman in a black uniform stood at the entrance, holding an umbrella for guests. I got out of the car, feeling the rain seeping through my jacket, and crossed the street quickly, trying not to look too suspicious. Laura and Owen were already in the lobby, and I could see their silhouettes through the glass doors. The hotel lobby was cozy, with deep green carpet, leather couches, and gold accents on the walls. I walked in, trying to look like a regular guest, and headed for a magazine rack in the corner where I could observe without drawing attention. Laura and Owen were standing by the elevator, their backs to me. She was talking, her hand on his arm, their fingers touching not just colleagues, not just friends. It was intimate, like they were sharing a secret I wasn't supposed to know. When the elevator doors opened, they walked in, still holding hands, and I saw Laura lean toward him, her laughter echoing in the lobby before the doors closed. I stood frozen, feeling the world around me shrink to a point. My worst fears had been confirmed, but it wasn't enough. I didn't want to believe my eyes. I wanted proof, something that couldn't be disputed, that couldn't be explained away as just work. I walked up to the reception desk, where a young guy in his mid-20s stood, with neatly combed hair and a name tag that said Eric. "Good evening," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was seething inside. "I need to talk to someone about the security footage." Eric raised his eyebrows, his face becoming wary. "Excuse me, sir, this is not exactly a standard request," he said, his voice polite but firm. "What do you need the records for?" I took a deep breath, knowing I was going to have to improvise. I wasn't a detective, I wasn't prepared for this, but there was no turning back. I'm a private detective," I lied, hoping I sounded convincing. "I'm working on a case. I need to check who entered room 412 tonight. It's important." Eric looked at me, his eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue. "It's against hotel policy, sir," he said, but his tone was less certain. "We'll need a warrant or something." I pulled out my wallet, pulled out 2 20s, and placed them on the counter, trying not to look too desperate. "It's not official," I said quietly. "Just a quick look. No one will know." Eric looked at the money, then at me. His face softened, and he sighed. "Okay," he said, lowering his voice, "but quickly, and if anyone asks, I didn't see you." He led me into a small room behind the desk where a monitor with several screens showed the hotel hallways. Eric clicked the mouse, and a recording from the fourth-floor hallway appeared on the screen. I saw Laura and Owen walking toward room 412. She was laughing, her hand in his, and he leaned over and kissed her temple like it was the most natural thing in the world. They entered the room, the door closed, and the recording ended. "Is that all?" Eric asked, looking at me with mild curiosity. "Yes," I said, feeling my throat tighten. "Thank you." I walked out of the room, my legs feeling weak. The rain was still falling, but I didn't notice as I walked to my car. I got behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine. Instead, I stared at the windshield, where the raindrops were running down like tears. The video was undeniable. Laura and Owen weren't just coworkers. They were together, and this wasn't a casual encounter. This was betrayal, and it had severed the last threads of trust I was trying to hold on to. I drove home, the radio off, thinking of nothing but what I had seen. Our cottage in Laurelhurst was silent, except for the creaking of the floorboards under my feet. I threw my keys on the table, took off my wet jacket, and collapsed on the sofa. Laura was probably still at the hotel. With him. I could have called her, stormed in, made a scene. But I didn't want to. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew it wouldn't change anything. The truth was right there in front of me, and now I had to decide what to do with it. I closed my eyes, but the image of Laura laughing with Owen wouldn't go away. I wanted to hate her, but instead I felt empty, like someone had ripped a part of me out, and I didn't know how to get it back. It was a Saturday morning in Portland, the way I once loved it. Gray skies, the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting from every coffee shop, the soft rustle of leaves blowing along the sidewalks of the Pearl District. But today, the city that Laura and I had chosen to live in 7 years ago felt foreign, like the set of a movie in which I didn't know my role. I, Jacob Wilson, 34, an engineer accustomed to fixing systems and finding bugs in code, sat in the bean and leaf, staring at my empty espresso cup. My dark hair, usually neatly combed, was sticking up in every direction. I had been up most of the night since what I'd seen at the Sentinel. Laura, my wife, was holding Owen Clark's hand, her laughter ringing in the hallway, and the CCTV footage of them hugging outside room 412 was a blow that still left me breathless. The coffee shop was cozy, with wooden tables worn with age and windows fogged with the morning humidity. Local paintings covered the walls, abstract swirls of blue and green that suggested the Willamette River on a rainy day. I sat in the corner, away from the counter, where the barista, a girl with a pierced nose and a tattoo of a bird on her wrist, hummed as she made a latte. My phone was in front of me, the screen glowing with a notification from an unknown number. "This is Anna from Brightwave. Meet me at Bean and Leaf at 10 a.m. Can I talk?" I didn't know what to expect, but after the previous day Laura and Owen disappearing into the hotel elevator, I was ready to seize on any clue that might explain what was happening to my marriage. Anna showed up at 10:05, her short brown hair slightly damp from the morning rain and her black coat smelling like damp wool. She was short, with high cheekbones and brown eyes that looked at the world with a slightly wary expression, as if she was always expecting a trick. She wore dark jeans and a mustard-colored sweater that made her skin look slightly warmer. I'd seen her at the Brightwave party a week ago when she'd casually mentioned that Laura and Owen were on the same wavelength. It had stung, but I hadn't expected her to contact me again. "Jacob," she nodded, sitting down across from him and setting a cup of black coffee on the table. Her voice was low, with a slight rasp, like someone who talks a lot at work, but rarely about herself. "Thank you for coming." "You're welcome," I said, pushing my empty cup away. My voice sounded tired, and I noticed her gaze slide to my eyes, which were probably red from lack of sleep. "You wrote that there was something to talk about. About what?" Anna looked down at her hands, her fingers fiddling with the rim of the paper cup. She was silent for a second, as if collecting her thoughts, and then she looked up, her eyes a mixture of determination and sympathy. "I saw you at the party," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "And I saw the way you looked at Laura and Owen. I'm not blind, Jacob, and I know you're not stupid." I felt my heart tighten. I wasn't ready for someone else to voice my suspicions. The video from last night, Laura and Owen walking into the room, laughing, hugging, was still vivid in my mind, but I didn't want it to become real for anyone else. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. My voice was hoarse, as if I hadn't spoken for a week. And aside, her fingers stopped fiddling with the cup, and she leaned a little closer. "Owen Clark," she said, lowering her voice so the barista or the tables around her wouldn't hear. "He's not who he says he is. At work, he's all charisma, a marketing genius, everyone raves about him. But behind the scenes, he's a ladies' man, Jacob. He uses his position to have affairs with his subordinates. I've seen it work. He compliments them, gives them the best projects, promises them promotions. And then, when he gets what he wants, he loses interest." I felt the blood pounding in my temples. Her words were like a hammer, shattering the last vestiges of my illusions. I remembered Laura at the party, her laughter, her hand on Owen's wrist, their looks. And yesterday, at the hotel, they embraced. It all fit together like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. "You're saying that, Laura." I trailed off, unable to finish. The word betrayal was too heavy to say out loud. Anna looked into my eyes. Her gaze was soft but not evasive. "I don't know exactly what he and Laura have," she said, "but I've seen the way he operates, and I've seen the way Laura interacts with him. This isn't just a job, Jacob. I don't want to scare you, but you deserve to know." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. "You barely know me. Why do you need this?" Anna leaned back in her chair, her face becoming more serious, almost grim. She took a sip of coffee as if gathering her courage. "Because I was you," she said quietly. "My ex, he was just like Owen. Charming, confident, everyone loved him. And then I found out he was sleeping with half his department. I didn't tell anyone because I was ashamed. I thought it was my fault. But when I saw you at the party, The way you looked at Laura, I knew how you felt, and I couldn't just keep quiet. I was silent, trying to process her words. Anna didn't seem like the type to look for drama or gossip. Her eyes, dark and slightly tired, spoke of pain she'd never wished on anyone. I felt a strange sense of relief, not because her words confirmed my fears, but because I was no longer alone in this nightmare. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice quieter than I expected. "But what do I do now?" Anna pulled out her phone, her fingers quickly running across the screen. She turned it toward me, showing the calendar app open to the Brightwave schedule. "Here," she said, pointing to an entry dated the following week. "Laura and Owen are going to San Francisco. Officially, it's a business trip, a presentation for a big client. But I heard Owen on the phone saying they're staying at the Fairmont Hotel. 2 rooms, but I don't believe they'll be sleeping separately." I looked at the screen. The entry was brief. Client presentation, San Francisco, Laura Carter, Owen Clark, October 10th, 12. The dates and details were like a punch to the solar plexus. I remembered Laura mentioning this trip a few days ago, casually, as if it meant nothing. "Just work, Jake," she'd said, and I'd nodded like an idiot. "How did you gain access to this?" I asked, trying to focus on the details so as not to drown in emotion. "I'm a designer," Anna replied, a slight smile touching her lips, but without humor. "I have access to the team's shared calendar. It's not secret information. No one pays attention. I can send you a screenshot if you want." "Yes, please," I said, feeling something new rise up inside me, not anger, not pain, but determination. "I need to know everything." Anna nodded, her fingers flying across the screen again, and a second later my phone beeped, receiving a message with a picture of a calendar. I looked at it as if it were proof of a crime I didn't want to admit to. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with worry. "I mean, you're not going to just barge in on them, are you?" I shook my head, even though part of me wanted to do just that, to storm into the hotel, kick down the door to room 412, force Laura to look me in the eye and explain why she had ruined everything we had. But I knew it would do no good. I wanted the truth, not the screaming. I wanted proof that couldn't be disputed. "I'm going to San Francisco," I said, and the words came out firmer than I expected. "I need to see it for myself, not to make a scene, just to be sure." Anna looked at me, her eyebrows raised slightly, but she didn't argue. "Be careful," she said. "Owen, he's slippery, knows how to get out of it. If you want proof, do it smart. Pictures, tapes, something he can't deny." "You sound like you've done this before," I said, trying to joke, but my voice was too tired to sound funny. "Not really," she said, her smile bitter. "But I've learned that the truth is the only thing that helps you move on, even if it breaks your heart." We sat in silence for a few seconds until the barista put on a new playlist, something indie with soft guitar chords. I looked at Anna, and it suddenly became clear to me that she wasn't just Laura's coworker who had decided to intervene. She was someone who knew what it was like to feel betrayed, and she didn't want me to be left in the dark. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, my voice quieter, almost a whisper. "You could have just kept quiet. This is not your drama." Anna shrugged, her fingers fiddling with the rim of her glass again. "Because I know what it's like to wonder," she said. "And I know what it's like to find out the truth too late. You don't deserve this, Jacob. No one does." I nodded, feeling a warmth spreading in my chest, not from joy, but from gratitude. For the first time in a week, I didn't feel alone in this nightmare. Anna was a stranger, but at that moment she was closer than anyone else. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "I don't know what I'd do without it." "Don't thank me," she said, her voice lighter. "Just keep me posted, okay? If anything goes wrong, text me. I don't want you to get into trouble." "Deal," I said, though I wasn't sure I could keep my promise. My mind was already in San Francisco, imagining myself stalking Laura and Owen, gathering evidence that would break my heart, but give me clarity. Anna finished her coffee and stood up, pulling on her coat. "I have to go," she said. "Good luck, Jacob, and take care." "You too," I replied, watching her leave, her figure dissolving into the crowd of passers-by outside the window. I sat there, staring at the screenshot of the calendar on my phone. The dates October 10th, 12 were like a death sentence. I knew I couldn't just wait for Laura to come back from her trip and talk about work. I had to go there, see for myself. Not to save our marriage, I wasn't sure that was possible anymore, but to take back control. To stop being the person who guesses and hopes and become the one who knows. I opened the laptop I'd brought with me and started looking for flights to San Francisco. The rain was still pounding the windows of the coffee shop, but it felt lighter now. I felt like I was taking a step forward, albeit into the unknown. The Brightwave calendar Anna had sent me sat on my phone like a map to the truth I feared but needed to find. San Francisco greeted me with a chill wind off the bay that cut right through my bones, despite the dark jacket and scarf wrapped around my neck. It was the morning of October 10th, 2025, and I, Jacob Wilson, a 34-year-old engineer from Portland, stood outside the Fairmont Hotel, looking up at its stately facade, white stone, arched windows, gold lettering that promised luxury, but were, to me, just the backdrop to my own personal hell. I had come not for a vacation or a job, but to keep an eye on my wife, Laura, and her creative director, Owen Clark, whose names on the Brightwave calendar had become a death sentence for me. After I saw them together at the Sentinel in Portland, their hands intertwined in the elevator, their laughter, their embrace on camera, I knew I couldn't just sit and wait. I needed the truth, irrefutable, like a code that either works or it doesn't. I booked the Fairmont through an app, choosing the cheapest option because my savings didn't support such an impulsive trip. I barely slept on the plane from Portland, replaying in my head the words of Laura's colleague Anna, who had shown me the agency calendar at the Bean and Leaf coffee shop and told me about Owen's reputation as a womanizer. Her words, "He uses his position to have affairs," echoed in my head as I lugged my backpack through the hotel lobby. The lobby was spacious, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the fresh flowers in vases by the front desk. "Good morning, sir," said the receptionist, a young woman with perfectly coiffed dark hair and a smile that seemed rehearsed. "How may I help you?" "I have a reservation," I said, trying to keep my voice even though I was seething inside. "Jacob Wilson." She tapped away at the keyboard, her red lacquered nails flashing in the lamplight. I glanced over my shoulder, checking to see if Laura or Owen were in the hall. They were supposed to have flown in last night, and according to the calendar, their client presentation was scheduled for tomorrow. That meant they had today off, a phrase that now sounded like a joke. "Here's your key, Mr. Wilson." The receptionist handed me a plastic card. "Room 608, 6th floor. The elevator is over there." "Thanks," I mumbled, taking my key and heading for the elevator. My room was modest, with a view of the building next door rather than the bay, but I didn't care. I dropped my backpack on the bed, pulled out my phone, and checked my messages. Nothing from Laura, just her morning text. "Busy all day, preparing a presentation. Will call this evening." I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the screenshot of the calendar Anna had sent me and reread the details. Client presentation, San Francisco, Laura Carter, Owen Clark, Fairmont Hotel. I knew they were there, and I was going to find them. I pulled on a dark baseball cap, pulled the hood of my sweatshirt up, and walked down to the lobby, trying to look like a regular tourist. My plan was simple: watch, observe, document. I didn't want to make a scene, not now, not here. I needed evidence I could show my lawyer if it came to divorce. The idea of divorce still felt foreign to me, like clothes that didn't fit, but after what I'd seen in Portland, I'd begun to accept it as inevitable. I found them in the hotel restaurant, Laurel Court, around 6 in the evening. The place was elegant, with high ceilings, white tablecloths, and waiters who moved with the grace of ballerinas. I took a table in the corner, behind a column, where I could see but not be seen. Laura was sitting by the window, her blonde hair loose and slightly wavy, and she was wearing a navy blue dress that showed off her figure. Her green eyes glittered in the candlelight, and the freckles on her nose made her look like the girl I'd met at a college party when she'd spilled beer on my shirt and laughed. But now she was laughing with Owen. He sat across from me, wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his dark hair slightly tousled, as if he'd just run his hand through it. His smile was the one I'd seen at the party in Portland, confident, almost predatory, like a man who knows he always gets what he wants. They were drinking wine, their glasses clinking together, and Laura leaned toward him, her hand resting on the table, her fingers almost brushing his. I took out my phone, trying not to draw attention to it, and snapped a few pictures. My stomach clenched, but the anger I'd expected wasn't there. Instead, I felt strangely calm, like I was looking at my life from a distance and watching it fall apart. "More coffee, sir?" The waiter, a young guy with a neat beard, stopped at my table. "No, thanks," I replied, not looking up from my phone. "Just the bill." He nodded and left, and I continued to watch. Laura and Owen stood up, his arm around her waist, and they walked out of the restaurant, heading for the waterfront. I paid and followed them, keeping my distance. San Francisco was bustling, even in October. Tourists taking pictures of the bay, street musicians playing saxophones, the smell of salt water mingling with the aroma of roasting chestnuts from a nearby stand. Laura and Owen walked slowly, their steps synchronized, as if they were dancing to an inaudible melody. She paused at the railing, looking out over the water, and he stood behind her, his arms around her waist. She turned, and they kissed, not quickly, not furtively, but slowly, as if the world belonged to them alone. I took a few more pictures, my fingers moving automatically. It didn't hurt, not in the way I expected. Instead, I felt a cold clarity, as if someone had turned on a light in a dark room, and I finally saw everything I'd been trying to ignore. Our marriage was over. Not because I wanted it to be, but because Laura had chosen another life, another story, one in which I had no place. The next day, I continued my surveillance. They were having breakfast at a cafe on the Embarcadero, sitting on the patio where the morning sun gilded their faces. Laura was wearing a light sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, and she laughed as Owen talked, gesturing with a forkful of omelet. I was across the street at another coffee shop, drinking black coffee that I didn't even drink. I took more pictures, capturing their closeness, their smiles, their touches. Each frame was a nail in the coffin of our marriage, but I didn't stop. I needed proof not to punish Laura, but to protect myself when the time came. Late in the afternoon, they were strolling along Pier 39, where crowds of tourists were snapping photos of sea lions barking on wooden platforms. Laura stopped at a souvenir stand, choosing a fridge magnet, and Owen put his arm around her from behind, whispering something in her ear. She laughed, her hand brushing his cheek, and I took another photo. I felt like a ghost, invisible, but still attached to them, to their world that was no longer mine. "Hey, buddy, are you okay?" A voice next to me pulled me out of my thoughts. It was the hot dog vendor, an older man with a gray mustache and a faded giant's cap. He was looking at me with mild concern, holding a pair of tongs in his hand. "Yeah," I said, putting the phone away. "Just admiring the view." "The view is certainly nice," he said, nodding toward the bay. "But you look as if you've lost something more important." I forced myself to smile, although it came out crooked. "Maybe so," I said, walking away from the tray. I didn't want him to keep asking questions, but his words had hurt me. I had really lost something, not just Laura, but the belief that our life was real. I returned to the hotel late at night, when the lights of San Francisco were already burning like stars falling to earth. My room was quiet, only the hum of the air conditioner breaking the silence. I opened the gallery on my phone and scrolled through the photos. Laura and Owen at dinner, on the boardwalk, at the pier. Each image was a piece of truth I couldn't ignore. I saved them in a separate folder, calling it evidence, a word that sounded cold and legalistic, but was the only one that made sense. I lay down on my bed, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. The anger I'd been waiting for never came. Instead, there was clarity, as if I'd finally solved a puzzle I'd been puzzling over for months. Laura wasn't mine anymore. She'd chosen Owen, or maybe she'd simply chosen a life where I didn't fit in. I didn't know what I was going to do next: divorce, talk, leave. But I knew these photos would give me the opportunity to move forward, whatever the next step might be. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe. Not because the pain was gone, but because I was no longer in the dark. The truth was in my hands, and now I could decide what to do with it. The San Francisco waterfront on Saturday night, October 11th, 2025, was alive as a scene from a movie. The lights of the bay reflected off the water, mingling with the neon signs of bars and restaurants, and the air smelled of salt, fried seafood, and something sweet like caramel from the street vendors. I, Jacob Wilson, 34, an engineer from Portland, was sitting in the corner of the Harbor Light, a small bar with wooden walls decorated with old nautical charts and windows overlooking the pier. My table was littered with empty soda glasses. I didn't drink anything stronger, because I wanted to keep a clear head. I had spent the last 2 days shadowing my wife, Laura, and her creative director, Owen Clark, photographing their romantic dinners, walks along the waterfront, and kisses that confirmed that our 7-year marriage was dead. My phone, lying on the table, was full of pictures, evidence that I was collecting not for revenge, but to protect myself when the time came. The bar was loud but not crowded. A couple of tourists in bright t-shirts were discussing sea lions at the bar. A group of locals were laughing at a joke in the corner, and the bartender, a burly man with an anchor tattooed on his forearm, was cleaning glasses with lazy confidence. I sat in the shade, wearing a dark baseball cap and sweatshirt, trying not to attract attention. My gaze kept wandering to the window, where I could see the boardwalk where Laura and Owen had strolled the day before, their silhouettes blurred by the sunset. Today, I didn't know where they were, but my photographs Laura with Owen's arm at Pier 39, their kiss by the railing of the bay, were like anchors, keeping me grounded in a reality where our marriage no longer existed. "You look like a guy who's been keeping tabs on someone." The voice next to me was low, slightly husky, but not judgmental. I turned to see a woman sitting at the next table. She was in her 40s, with short dark hair cut into a neat bob and gray eyes that looked at me with a keenness, as if she could see right through me. She wore a black leather jacket, dark jeans, and boots that looked like they'd been through a mile. Her face, with the slight lines around her eyes, was attractive, but not in the classic sense. It had a strength to it, like someone who's seen a lot and isn't afraid to tell the truth. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice hoarse with fatigue. I wasn't ready to talk, but her tone didn't let me just brush her off. "I said you looked like someone who was following someone," she repeated, a small smile touching her lips, but not mockingly. She picked up a glass of something clear, a gin and tonic, maybe, or just soda, and took a sip. "I'm Monica. I work here at the hotel. Saw you in the Fairmont lobby yesterday, looking like you were hiding from the FBI." I felt my cheeks burn. I was trying to be inconspicuous, but apparently I wasn't as good at it as I thought. "Jacob," I introduced myself, unsure whether to continue the conversation. "I'm not hiding. I'm just relaxing." "So, you're on vacation," she chuckled, her eyes narrowing, but there was more curiosity in them than suspicion. "With a baseball cap pulled down over your eyes and a phone full of photos you check every 5 minutes, doesn't sound like a vacation." I froze, my fingers involuntarily tightening around the phone. Has she noticed the photos, or was this just a bluff? I decided to play it safe. "Is this how you always start conversations with strangers?" I asked, trying to change the subject. "Or do I just seem suspicious?" Monica laughed, her laugh short but sincere, as if she was not used to laughing often. "Only the ones who look like they have a history," she said, leaning back in her chair. "I'm a private investigator, Jacob. I work out of Fairmont, investigating a case, and I know what people who are hiding something look like. You're not a criminal, that's clear, but you have the look of someone who's trying to catch someone red-handed." I felt my heart skip a beat. She was a detective. That could be a problem or an opportunity. I looked at her more closely. Her leather jacket was worn but expensive, and there was a thin scar on her wrist, barely visible under a silver bracelet. She didn't look like someone who was looking for trouble, but she didn't look like someone who was avoiding it either. "Let's say you're right," I said slowly, choosing my words. "Let's say I'm looking for answers. What do you suggest?" Monica leaned closer, her elbows resting on the table, and she looked me straight in the eyes. "Tell me what's going on," she said. "Not everything, just the gist. I'm not a cop, I'm not going to judge you. But I can help if you don't want to get into trouble." I hesitated. Telling a stranger that my wife might be cheating on me was like opening a wound in front of a crowd. But her gaze, direct and calm, said she was not one to gossip or judge. And I was so tired of being alone in this nightmare that I decided to take the risk. "My wife, Laura," I began, my voice quieter than I intended. "She's here at the Fairmont with a coworker, Owen Clark. I saw them together in Portland at another hotel. They're, they're not just coworkers. I came here to make sure. I took pictures of them having dinner, walking, kissing. But I don't know what to do next." Monica nodded, her face unchanged, but something flickered in her eyes, understanding, maybe even sympathy. "I know what it's like," she said, her voice softening. "My marriage fell apart 5 years ago. My ex, Paul, was a lawyer. Always said he was working late until I found him in his office with his secretary. I was furious, wanted to smash his car, burn his suits. But it wouldn't have helped. I hired a lawyer, gathered evidence, and came out of it with my head held high. You're on the same path now, Jacob, but you'll have to be smarter than I was then." I felt a warmth spread in my chest, not from joy, but from the fact that someone understood. Monica was not Anna, Laura's colleague who had given me the agency calendar, but her words were just as sincere, and I felt I could trust her. "What do you mean, smarter?" I asked, leaning closer. "I have photos. Is that enough?" "Photos are a start," she said, her voice businesslike, as if she'd switched into work mode. "But you need legal evidence. Recordings, documents, something a lawyer can use if this goes to trial. You're in Fairmont, right? I can help you with the security footage, if you know where it was." I blinked, not expecting such an offer. She was offering help, just like that, without asking questions. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, my voice hoarse with fatigue and emotion. "You don't know me. This isn't your problem." Monica shrugged, her smile was small but sad. "Because I know what it's like," she said. "To feel like your world is falling apart and not know how to pick up the pieces. I don't want you to do anything stupid like storm into their room or make a scene. That'll just make things worse. Let's do this right." I nodded, feeling something new rise up inside me, not anger, not pain, but hope. Not that I could save the marriage, but that I could come out of this with dignity. "Okay," I said. "What do I need to do?" Monica pulled a small business card and a pen out of her jacket pocket. She wrote something on the back and handed it to me. It was a lawyer's card, John Carter, Family Law, San Francisco, with a phone number and address. "Call him," she said. "John's a good guy. He helped me with my divorce. He knows how to handle these types of cases. In the meantime, I can talk to security at the Fairmont. I have connections there. I'm working a burglary case at the hotel. If Laura and Owen were in the lobby or the hallways, I can get the security footage. But you'll need to tell me when and where you saw them." "Yesterday, about 6 o'clock, at the Laurel Court restaurant," I said, recalling the details. "And then on the waterfront at Pier 39. This morning, they were at a cafe on the Embarcadero about 9. Monica nodded, writing something down in the notebook she took out of her bag. "Okay," she said. "Give me a day. I'll check the records and forward them to you if I find anything useful. But Jacob, listen to me." She looked me in the eye, her voice growing serious. "Don't let your emotions get the better of you. You're in shock right now, I can tell. But if you want to protect yourself, your finances, your life, you need to be level-headed. Focus on the future, not on revenge." I nodded, feeling her words settle in my head like stones at the bottom of a river. She was right. I didn't want revenge, I wanted freedom. Freedom from doubt, from pain, from a marriage that was no longer mine. Thank you, Monica, I said, and I meant it. I didn't expect that. No one expects it, she said, her smile growing a little warmer. But sometimes life throws you allies when you least expect them. Keep me posted, okay? Here's my number. She wrote it on the same card, under the lawyer's address. I picked up the card, its edges a little frayed, but the text was clear. John Carter, attorney, and Monica's number, written in her firm, confident handwriting. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a thread to a future where I could start over. Agreed, I said, putting the business card in my pocket. I'll call if I need anything. Monica finished her drink and stood up, straightening her jacket. Good luck, Jacob, she said, her voice soft but strong. And remember, you're stronger than you think. She left, her boots clicking on the wooden bar floor, and I was left alone, staring at the business card in my hand. For the first time in a week, I felt like I wasn't alone. Monica, with her directness and understanding, had given me not just help, but hope subtle but real. I didn't know what would happen next, but now I had a plan, and that was more than I had yesterday. I finished my soda and walked out onto the waterfront, where the lights of San Francisco continued to burn as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had changed. I had a business card in my pocket that could be my ticket to a new life, and I was ready to take the next step. Portland in October was damp, and the evening air smelled of wet leaves and smoke from the fireplaces in the old houses of Nob Hill. I was Jacob Wilson, 34, an engineer accustomed to taking systems apart and finding where they break, walking down the sidewalk toward the hearth, a small restaurant with warm light pouring in from the windows and the smell of grilling meat that beckoned to passers-by. My dark shirt, neatly pressed, and black pants were chosen with calculation. I wanted to appear collected, confident, even as a storm raged inside. It had been a week since I had returned from San Francisco, where I had shadowed Laura and Owen Clark, her creative director, photographing them on dinners and walks and the kisses that sealed the end of our 7-year marriage. Tonight, I had invited Laura to dinner, lying that I wanted to talk and fix things. In fact, I was going to put an end to this lie not with a scream, not with a scene, but with a truth that she could not deny. The restaurant was cozy, with wood-beamed ceilings, candles on the tables, and walls covered with photographs of old Portland. I picked a table by the window, overlooking the street where passers-by were sheltering from the drizzle under umbrellas. My phone was in my jacket pocket, full of pictures from San Francisco. Laura and Owen having dinner at the Fairmont, hugging on the boardwalk, kissing at Pier 39. There was also the hotel security camera footage that Monica, the private investigator I'd met at a San Francisco bar, had helped me obtain. That evidence was my shield, my power, and tonight I was going to use it. Laura walked in at 7:05 p.m., 5 minutes late, as usual. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a low bun, a few strands escaping to frame her freckled face. She was wearing a dark green dress that showed off her slender frame and a light coat, still damp from the rain. Her green eyes, usually bright, looked tired today, but she smiled when she saw me, and that smile, warm, familiar, made me briefly remember how things used to be when we were a team. "Jake, you're here," she said, sitting down across from him and taking off her coat. Her voice was light, but there was a wariness to it, as if she were expecting a catch. "You look good." "Thank you," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "You too. How was your day?" "Oh, crazy," she sighed, opening the menu, but her eyes slid over the lines without lingering. "Presentations, clients, the usual. And you?" "Work," I said, shrugging. "Nothing new." The waiter, a young guy with a piercing in his eyebrow and a compass tattoo on his wrist, approached our table. "Good evening," he said, smiling. "What would you like to order?" "I'll have the mushroom risotto," Laura said, closing the menu, "and a glass of Pinot Noir." "Steak, medium rare, and a soda," I added without looking at the menu. I didn't want to be distracted by the food. The waiter nodded and left, leaving us in awkward silence. "You said you wanted to talk," Laura began, her fingers fiddling with her napkin. "About what? You've been kind of..." weird all evening. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pound, not with fear, but with determination. I had been rehearsing this moment all week, imagining how I would lay the truth out in front of her. But now, as she sat across from me, her eyes looking at me with their usual warmth, I felt a pang of sadness. Not anger, not fury, but sadness for what we had lost. "Laura," I said, my voice even but firm, "I know what's going on between you and Owen." Her face changed, the smile disappeared, her eyes narrowed, and her fingers froze on the napkin. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice colder, but there was a note of panic in it. "Jake, we've been over this. He's my boss. This is a job. Don't lie to me," I said, my voice calmer than I expected. "I was in San Francisco. I saw you. The dinners, the walks, the kisses. I know everything." Laura froze, her cheeks paled, and she looked at me as if I had slapped her. She opened her mouth to say something, but stopped when the waiter returned with the drinks. He placed a glass of wine in front of her and a soda in front of me, oblivious to the tension at the table. "The food will be here soon," he said and left. Laura took the glass, but her hand was shaking and the wine almost spilled. "Were you following me?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "Jake, how could you?" "How could you?" I said, and there was no malice in my voice, only weariness. "I gave you a chance to be honest. After the party, after all your, it's just a job. But you kept lying. So yes, I followed. And I have proof." I pulled out my phone, opened the folder of photos, and set it on the table, screen facing her. The first picture was of her and Owen at the Fairmont restaurant, their hands touching, her smile the kind I hadn't seen in months. I scrolled through them, walking along the boardwalk, his arm around her waist, their kiss at Pier 39. Laura stared at the screen, her eyes widening, and I saw her lips tremble. It's not what you think," she said, her voice weak, as if she didn't believe her own words. "Owen, it was a mistake. It doesn't mean anything, Jake. I swear." "Mistake?" I asked, my voice a little sharper. "Laura, I saw you in Portland, at the Sentinel Hotel. I saw the security footage. And in San Francisco, it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose him." She shook her head, her eyes shining with tears, but I didn't know if they were genuine or just a reflex. "It's not like that," she said, her voice louder but still shaking. "Yeah, I'm confused. Owen, he made me feel special. Work, stress, all of it. I didn't mean to hurt you, Jake. I love you." I looked at her, and part of me wanted to believe. I wanted to remember Laura laughing at my jokes, dancing with me in the kitchen to old jazz. But the other part of me, the part that had seen her with Owen, the part that had held the photographs, knew it was a lie. Not her words, but our lives. "Love doesn't look like that," I said quietly. "Love doesn't lie. It doesn't hide in hotels. It doesn't make me feel like I'm nobody." Laura looked down, her fingers squeezing the napkin so hard it tore. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. "Quit. Never see Owen again. I'll do it, Jake. Let's start over." I shook my head, feeling something click inside me, like a lock that had finally opened. "I don't want you to quit," I said. "And I don't want to start over. I'm filing for divorce, Laura." Her face turned even paler, and she looked at me as if she couldn't believe her ears. "Divorce?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Jake, you can't be serious. We can fix this. It was a mistake. "That's enough," I interrupted, my voice hard as stone. "I don't want to listen anymore. I've seen enough, and I'm tired of pretending everything is okay." I stood up, leaving the phone on the table so she could look at the photos again, at the truth she was trying to deny. The waiter brought the food, but I didn't even look at the plate. "Jake, wait," Laura said, her voice breaking as she grabbed my arm. "Please, let's talk. Don't do this." I looked at her eyes full of tears, at her hand still holding mine. And for a second I felt sad, not for her, but for us, for who we were, for the house in Laurelhurst, for the dreams we shared. But the sadness was light as smoke, and it couldn't hold me. Goodbye, Laura, I said, gently pulling my hand away. I wish you happiness. I really do. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, feeling the cold air sting my face. The rain was still drizzling, but it felt clean, like it was washing away everything that had held me back. I walked down the street, my steps firm, and for the first time in months, I felt free. Not happy, not light, but free. The photos I'd left on the table weren't just evidence of her betrayal. They were my ticket to a new life, where I was no longer a victim. Portland was cold in early February, but not as chilly as it had been in October, when I, Jacob Wilson, a 34-year-old engineer, left my old life behind at a table at the hearth, posting photos of her infidelity in front of Laura. Now, 4 months later, I was standing in my new apartment in the Pearl District, small but bright, with large windows that let in the gray light of a winter morning. It was on the fourth floor of an old brick building, with bare walls that I hadn't yet painted and hardwood floors that creaked but weren't annoying. The furniture was minimal: an IKEA couch, a table where I sipped my coffee, and a bed with a plain gray bedspread. It wasn't where I'd pictured myself a year ago, when Laura and I were living in a cottage in Laurelhurst, dreaming of an apple tree in the yard. But it was home now, my clean slate, and I was ready to start over. I stood by the window, looking out onto the street, where people were bundled in scarves and the coffee shops were already buzzing with morning customers. I held a camera in my hand, a Canon I'd bought on sale after signing up for a photography course. Photography had always been a quiet dream of mine, something I'd put off because Laura had told me it was a hipster hobby. Now, without her voice in my head, I spent my evenings studying composition and light, photographing the streets of Portland, the bridges over the Willamette, the people who didn't notice my lens. On the windowsill sat my favorite photograph, a black and white shot of the steel bridge taken in the fog, the streetlights blurring like stars. It was mine, not Laura's, not our past lives, but mine, and it reminded me that I could still make something beautiful. The divorce was hard, but not as hard as I'd feared. After dinner at the hearth, I contacted John Carter, a lawyer whose business card Monica, a private investigator in San Francisco, had given me. John was straightforward, with a dry sense of humor and a knack for explaining legal subtleties as if we were discussing the weather. With the help of the photos and security footage Monica had helped me obtain, the deal went smoothly. Laura didn't argue, she signed the papers, and by January I was officially a free man. Freedom was strange. It didn't feel good, but it gave me room to breathe, like finally taking off a tight shirt. I finished my coffee, black and bitter, just the way I liked it, and put on my jacket. It was Saturday, and I was heading to the Bean and Leaf, the same coffee shop where, months earlier, Laura's coworker Anna had told me about a trip to San Francisco. It was my place now, not because of Anna, but because of the smell of freshly ground beans and the soft indie rock playing on the speakers. I grabbed my camera, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and walked out, feeling the cold air sting my cheeks. The coffee shop was full, but not noisy. Students were working on laptops, a couple of old men were reading newspapers, and the barista, the same girl with the nose piercing, smiled at me like I was an old friend. "Espresso?" she asked, her voice cheerful despite the early hour. "Yeah," I replied, smiling back. "And a croissant, if there are any left." She nodded, and I took a table by the window, pulling a notebook of notes on photography from my backpack. The course I'd started in November had been my salvation. The instructor, a bearded guy named Mike who wore flannel shirts and talked about light like poetry, had inspired me to experiment. I met people there, not close friends, but people I could have a beer with after class and talk about exposure or composition. It was new, having people who didn't know Laura, didn't know our history, and who saw me as just Jacob, the guy with the camera. I was leafing through my notebook when I heard a familiar voice. "You still carry that camera around?" The voice was low, slightly husky, and I looked up to see Monica, the private detective from San Francisco. She was standing at my table, holding a paper cup of coffee, her dark hair a little longer than I remembered, her gray jacket a little longer than the leather one. Her gray eyes looked at me with warm amusement, but not malice. "Monica, I blinked, not expecting her here. "What are you doing in Portland?" "Work," she replied, sitting down across from me without an invitation. "Investigating a theft at a gallery in Perla. And you're a photographer now, I suppose?" She nodded toward my camera, a smile touching her lips. "I'm trying," I said, feeling warm inside. Monica had been the one who'd helped me in San Francisco when I was at my wit's end, and her forthrightness had given me the strength to keep going. "I took a class. It's helping." "Does it help you stay sane?" she asked, her eyebrows raised, but there was no judgment in her voice, only understanding. "Something like that," I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "And you? Still catching thieves in hotels?" "Not only that," she replied, taking a sip of coffee, "but I'm glad you're here and not at the bar like last time. You look better." I looked at her, trying to figure out what she meant. My dark hair was still wild, and there were probably shadows under my eyes from sleepless nights, but I felt lighter than I had in San Francisco. Then I had been a ghost, watching over Laura and Owen. Now I was me. "The divorce went through," I said, my voice even but with a hint of pride. "Thanks for your help. The tapes, the lawyer, it all worked out." Monica nodded, her eyes softening. "Glad John helped," she said. "He's a good guy. And you? How are you, Jacob? Not legally. Inside." I thought about it, looking at my camera. The question was simple, but the answer was not. The last few months had been like crossing a river. Sometimes I sank, sometimes I surfaced, but I was moving forward. "Better," I said finally. "Not perfect, but better." I moved, I started taking pictures, I made friends. It's like breathing again. "I know the feeling," Monica said, her voice quieter. "When my marriage fell apart, I thought I'd never get over it. But then I started working, traveling, and living for myself. It doesn't heal, but it makes room for something new." I looked at her, and there was the same strength in her eyes that I had seen in San Francisco. But now there was something else there, a warmth that made her not just an ally, but someone I wanted to talk to more. "Want to see it?" I asked, nodding at the camera. I took a couple of shots I like. "Show me," she said, her smile widening. "But I warn you, I'm a harsh critic." I opened the gallery on my camera and showed her the shot of Steel Bridge, the one that sat on my windowsill. She picked up the camera, her fingers, with their short, unvarnished nails, holding it carefully, and she looked at the screen carefully. "It's cool," she said, her voice sincere. "The fog, the light, there's a mood to it. You're really good at this." "Thank you," I replied, feeling my cheeks flush slightly. "It's mine. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like seeing the world in a new way." "I understand," she said, handing the camera back. "When everything falls apart, you start to see things you missed before. That's what rebirth is." We fell silent, but the silence was comfortable, like a warm sweater on a cold day. The barista brought my espresso and croissant, and I offered Monica half. "I wouldn't refuse," she said, breaking off a piece. "But only if you tell me what else you're filming. Do you have anything to show me besides bridges?" I laughed for the first time that day, and it was easy, like I was myself again. "The streets, the people," I said. "Yesterday I photographed an old man feeding pigeons in the park. He looked like he knew all the secrets of the world." "Sounds like my type," Monica replied, her eyes glittering. "Maybe you could show me around. Portland isn't my city, but I'm here for a few days." I looked at her, and there was something more to her offer than just a walk. Not romance, not right away, but something cautious, like the first step on thin ice. I nodded. "Okay," I said. "Tomorrow after lunch, I know a couple of streets worth renting." "Okay," she replied, finishing her coffee. "But only if you don't make me pose. I'm terrible in front of the camera." "I don't believe it," I said, and it was true. Her face, with its slight wrinkles and direct gaze, was like a story that I wanted to capture. We talked for another hour about photography, about her work, about the time she followed a thief in Las Vegas and almost got stuck in an elevator with him. Her stories were vivid, full of detail, and I found myself smiling more than I had in months. When she left, leaving me her number and a promise to meet tomorrow, I felt something stir in my chest, not love, not yet, but a spark that could become something more. I walked back to my apartment, set the camera down on the table, and looked at the photograph of the steel bridge, now hanging on the wall in a plain black frame. It was my picture, my Portland, my new life. Laura's betrayal had left scars, but it had also given me a chance to find myself not a husband, not a victim, but Jacob, who could hold a camera and see the world his way. Monica, with her directness and warm smile, was part of that new horizon, and I was ready to see where it would take me. Portland in October was just the way I'd come to love it. The air smelled of wet leaves and freshly brewed coffee. The streets of the Pearl District glistened with recent rain, and the streetlights cast a soft glow on the brick facades of old buildings. I was Jacob Wilson, a 35-year-old engineer, and now an aspiring photographer, standing in Lumen Gallery, a small space with white walls and wood floors where my first photography show was opening today. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined myself here back then. I'd been a shadow, following Laura and her affair with Owen Clark, collecting evidence of the infidelity that would eventually lead to divorce. Now I was a different person, in a dark shirt, with neatly combed hair and an easy smile, looking at my work black and white photographs of Portland, its bridges, its streets, and its people, which had become my way of seeing the world anew. The gallery was small but cozy, tall windows let in streetlights, my photographs in simple black frames hung on the walls, and a table with wine and snacks in the center, buzzing with guests. My photography teacher, Mike, a bearded guy in a plaid shirt, clapped me on the shoulder, congratulating me on my debut. New friends Liz, a designer with purple streaks in her hair, and Tom, a programmer with a dry sense of humor, were discussing my pictures, arguing over which was the best. I felt a warmth in my chest, not from the wine, but from the fact that these people were seeing the real me, not a shadow of the past. I adjusted the frame of my favorite photograph, the steel bridge in the fog, the one that hung in my new apartment in the Pearl. It was a symbol of my rebirth. A year ago I had been broken, but now here I was, in a gallery, with work that spoke of my world, my truth. I took a sip of water from my glass when I noticed her Laura standing in the corner by the exit. She was alone, her blonde hair pulled back into a messy bun, and the dark coat, slightly too big, made her look even more fragile. Her green eyes, once so bright, seemed dull now, and the freckles on her nose stood out against her pale skin. She looked less like the Laura I knew, confident, radiant, and more like someone who had lost something important. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I hadn't seen her since that dinner at the hearth, when I'd left the photos of her and Owen on the table and announced our divorce. I didn't know why she'd come, but the look in her eyes, filled with regret, was an echo of the past I'd tried to leave behind. She noticed me looking and approached slowly, her steps cautious, as if she were afraid to startle me. "Jake," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. I, I heard about your exhibit. I wanted to see it. It's amazing." I looked at her, trying to figure out what I was feeling. A year ago, her voice would have evoked anger, pain, anything. Now I felt only a slight sadness, not for her, but for who we were. "Thank you," I replied, my voice even but soft. "I didn't expect you here." She nodded, her fingers fiddling with the strap of her bag, and I noticed that her nails, usually perfectly painted, were bitten. "I know," she said, her eyes dropping to the floor, then back up to me. "I just wanted to see you and your work. It's really you, Jake. I never knew you could do that." "There were a lot of things you didn't know," I said, and the words came out harsher than I intended. I took a deep breath to soften my tone. "But that's okay. It's in the past." Laura looked at me, her eyes shining as if she was holding back tears. "Jake, I want to apologize," she began, her voice shaking. "For everything. For Owen, for lying, for the way I hurt you. I was an idiot. I messed up, but that's no excuse. I want you to know that I'm sorry. So sorry." I was silent, looking at her. Her words were sincere, but they didn't touch me the way they once might have. I remembered the pictures I'd shown her in the restaurant of her and Owen, kissing, laughing. I'd been broken then, but now I was whole, and her apology was like a letter that had arrived too late. "Thank you for that," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I appreciate you coming and speaking up, but apologizing. It doesn't change what happened." "I know," she said, her voice breaking as she took a step closer. "But Jake, maybe we could try again. I've changed. Owen, it's over. I realized I'd lost. You. Us." I looked at her, and her eyes, full of regret, were like a mirror of the past. She was the Laura I had loved, but now I saw her clearly not as my wife, but as someone who had chosen a different path. I shook my head, gently but firmly. "Laura," I said, my voice warm but firm, "you gave me a chance to start over. Your betrayal, it broke me, but it also forced me to find myself. I'm not angry. I'm grateful, but I don't want to go back." Her face twitched and a tear rolled down her cheek, leaving a thin trail. She wiped it away, trying to smile, but it came out crooked. "Do you really think so?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "That it was for the best?" "Yes," I answered, and it was true. I found what makes me happy. Photography, friends, the life that is mine. I don't want to go back to what was. She nodded, her eyes lowered, and she took a step back as if admitting defeat. "I'm happy for you, Jake," she said, her voice weak but sincere. "I really am. You deserve to be happy." "You too," I said, and it wasn't just politeness. I wanted her to find her way, even if it no longer crossed mine. She looked at me again, her gaze heavy, full of words she hadn't said. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her figure disappearing into the crowd of guests, and I felt something inside me let go, like I'd closed a book I'd kept open for too long. "Are you okay?" The voice next to me was familiar, warm, with a slight huskiness. I turned to see Monica standing a few feet away. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her gray eyes, slightly crinkled at the edges, had a warmth I had learned to appreciate over the past few months. She was wearing a dark blue blouse and jeans, and around her neck hung a thin silver pendant, which she fidgeted with when she was nervous. "Yeah," I replied, smiling. "Just an unexpected guest." Monica followed my gaze to the exit where Laura had just disappeared. "Was it her?" she asked, her voice neutral but curious. "Laura." "Yes," I said, feeling the tension fading. "I came to see the exhibition. To talk." Monica stepped closer, her hand lightly touching my elbow, and the gesture was so natural that I felt at home. "How did it go?" she asked, her eyebrows raised. "It doesn't look like you're going to run after her." I laughed, and this laughter was light, like the air after rain. "No," I said. "I told her it was over. And you know, I really mean it. For the first time in a long time, I feel at peace." Monica smiled, and her smile was genuine, unfeigned, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She wasn't just the detective who'd helped me in San Francisco when I was on edge. Over the past months, she'd become a friend we'd meet at cafes, walk around Portland, discuss everything from photography to her investigative stories. And somewhere in between those conversations, between her laughter and my photos, I began to sense that there was something more between us. Not a storm, not a passion, but something quiet, honest, like a foundation to build on. "I'm proud of you, Jake," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You went through hell and came out the other side. And look at this." She nodded toward the gallery walls where my photographs hung. "This is yours. You did it." I looked at her, and her smile, sincere and open, was a contrast to Laura's look of regret. Monica wasn't my salvation, I saved myself, but she was the one who reminded me that I could be more than my pain. "Thank you," I said, and my voice was sincere. "For being there, then in San Francisco, and now." "Don't thank me," she replied, her eyes shining. "I'm not here for gratitude. I'm here because I like being around you." I felt my heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something new, something light. I held out my hand, and she took it, her fingers warm despite the chill of the evening. We walked out of the gallery together, her hand in mine, and I felt the world around me grow clearer. The streets of Portland, with their lights and the smell of rain, were my home, my new beginning. Laura was part of a past I had finally let go of, and Monica was part of a future I was ready to embrace. "Want some coffee?" I asked, nodding toward the coffee shop across the street. "Or is it too late for caffeine?" "It's never too late," she replied, her smile widening. "But only if you treat me." "Deal," I said, and we walked across the street, her hand still in mine, the world around us seeming full of possibilities. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.